Hello and welcome to this 60th episode of Questioning Woke Psychotherapy. My name is Michael Dwan Herrick. I'm a psychotherapist and life coach in private practice in London. In this video, I'm going to talk about political fundamentalism, the underlying psychological traits of those who subscribe to it, and the dangers it poses. The idea of religious fundamentalism is widely discussed and understood, but not so much political fundamentalism. I see them as the same. They just focus on different ideological systems. Because I criticize far-left woke ideology in this series, you might guess that I will focus on the political fundamentalism of the far left. Well, yes, currently that's what I am concerned about. However, the problems with fundamentalism arise on the extremes of both the left and the right, which I will make clear later. Let's start with this question. Why have so many replaced religious fundamentalism with political fundamentalism? It's a long story, but just a few factors make it comprehensible. With the dawn of the Western Enlightenment, about 400 years ago, ushering in the age of science and rationality, we began to lean away from religion. There were many objections to this, but it spread, so much so that by the 19th century, Nietzsche would proclaim that God is dead. For those who abandoned religion, our traditional ways of making meaning and establishing a moral order were gone. Yet our need for such things persisted, as it always will. It's important to recognize that this is not only true for individuals, it's also true socially. To establish cohesive and collaborative social organization, which we need to survive, we need shared ways to make sense of the world as well as moral agreements that inform our relationships with each other. Nietzsche also famously predicted that with the death of God, the future would bring an age of nihilism and hedonism, as well as the collectivist totalitarian regimes of communism. He believed we would be both lost and that we would find new secular political religion to fervently believe in, one that would make sense of the world and provide moral order. It turned out he was right. Whether or not one decides to classify woke as a religion, it bears the hallmarks of a fundamentalist belief system, as we will see shortly. It provides what appears to be deep human needs for meaning and a sense of belonging within a coherent social order. When religious doctrine was no longer an option, people needed and found an alternative in political ideology. Having these needs met does not have to result in fundamentalism, but sometimes it does, and the results are not good. The next question is, what's the nature of fundamentalist beliefs? In my research on this topic, I found a paper by Dr. Rick Peels and Nora Kindermann, published in the Journal of Political Ideologies in 2022. It provides a good description of fundamentalist beliefs and focuses on the nature and characteristics of fundamentalism across different domains, including religion, politics, and ideology generally. Peels and Kindermann suggest the following 6 desiderata, that's what they call them, that help define what makes a belief or a belief system fundamentalist. Here's a summary of the 6 desiderata. 1. Exclusivity of beliefs. Fundamentalist beliefs are exclusive, meaning that those who hold them believe their perspective is the sole truth, while other beliefs or interpretations are false or misguided. There's no room for alternative viewpoints within this framework. 2. Immunity to counter-evidence. These beliefs are typically immune to counter-evidence. Fundamentalists tend to dismiss or reinterpret any evidence that contradicts their beliefs, maintaining their position, regardless of the new information or arguments that challenge it. 3. Epistemic certainty. Fundamentalists exhibit a high degree of certainty about their beliefs. They often claim to have absolute knowledge or truth, viewing their beliefs as beyond question or doubt. 4. The beliefs held by fundamentalists are seen not just as personal convictions, but as universal norms that everyone should adhere to. Fundamentalists often seek to impose these beliefs on others, believing it is their duty to spread what they see as the truth. 5. Impermeability to evidence-based revision. Fundamentalist beliefs are resistance to change based on evidence or reason. Adherents are often unwilling to revise their beliefs, even when presented with compelling evidence or logical arguments that challenge their position. This is similar to immunity to counter-evidence, but refers to a persistent resistance to change over time based on evidence. 6. Centrality. Fundamentalist beliefs hold a central position in the lives of those who adhere to them. These beliefs are often at the core of their identity, guiding their actions, decisions, and interpretations of the world. These 6 desiderata outline the characteristics that define fundamentalist beliefs. They emphasize the rigid, exclusive, and resistant nature of fundamentalist beliefs, highlighting the challenges such belief systems pose to open dialogue, pluralism, and evidence-based reasoning. Fundamentalists are deeply committed to their beliefs, often to the exclusion of all others, and are generally impervious to arguments or evidence that might contradict their worldview. Gleaning perspectives from various fields such as psychology, sociology, political science, and religious studies, I see these 6 desiderata echoed using different language. I want to add another one that gets mentioned and is not explicitly on the list of desiderata. We call it moral and epistemic superiority. Those who hold fundamentalist beliefs often view themselves as morally and intellectually superior to others. They believe that their adherence to these beliefs grants them a special status, often justified by a higher authority or a unique understanding of the truth. As you can see, political fundamentalists typically view their ideological position as absolute and infallible, rejecting any alternative perspectives or compromises. This can lead to an authoritarian approach to politics, where dissenting views are suppressed and efforts are made to impose these beliefs on others, sometimes through coercive or violent means. So far, we've just been trying to understand the nature of fundamentalist beliefs. Now, let's see what we can understand about the psychology of people who hold these beliefs. Given the nature of fundamentalist beliefs, the psychology should come as no surprise. Psychologically, we see the following traits in fundamentalists. 1. Cognitive rigidity. Fundamentalists tend to exhibit a higher degree of cognitive rigidity, meaning they prefer clear, unambiguous answers and may struggle with uncertainty or complex, nuanced thinking. This rigidity can manifest as a strong preference for black and white thinking, where issues are seen in terms of absolute right and wrong. Cognitive rigidity also is labeled as the need for cognitive closure or intolerance of ambiguity. Number 2, authoritarianism. Fundamentalists are often found to score higher on measures of authoritarianism. This includes a preference for conformity, obedience to authority, and a belief in strict social hierarchies. Authoritarian individuals may be drawn to fundamentalist ideologies that promote these values. 3. Social identity and group cohesion. Fundamentalism can be linked to a strong social identity, where individuals derive a significant part of their self-concept from their ideological group. This can lead to in-group favoritism and out-group hostility, reinforcing the boundaries between us and them. 4. Fear and anxiety. Some research suggests that fear and anxiety, particularly related to existential concerns like death or the meaning of life, can drive individuals toward fundamentalist beliefs. These beliefs provide a sense of certainty and security in the face of life's uncertainties. In terms of the Big Five personality inventory, this translates into being high in neuroticism. Number 5, openness to experience. This is another of the Big Five personality traits. People who are lower in this trait may be more prone to fundamentalism. This trait is associated with a preference for tradition, routine, and familiarity, rather than novelty, exploration, and intellectual curiosity. 6, moral absolutism. Fundamentalists often adhere to moral absolutism, believing that their beliefs provide an unchanging, objective set of moral laws. Number 7, literalism. A tendency to interpret texts literally rather than metaphorically or symbolically is a common trait among fundamentalists. This literalism can support rigid belief structures and a resistance to reinterpretation or contextual understanding of ideological teachings. If you like this video so far, please give it a like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with a friend. Thanks. And please stick with me for the whole video. I'll explain the idea about antibodies at the end. So, given that description, what could possibly go wrong with political fundamentalism, whether far right or far left? Let's jog our historical memory and recall 4 examples of it going wrong. These well-known examples represent 2 from the right and 2 from the left. Far-right totalitarian states. Nazi Germany, 1933 to 1945. The ideologies, National Socialism, or Nazism, is a far-right ideology that combined extreme nationalism, racial purity, anti-Semitism, and anti-communism. It sought to create a homogeneous Aryan race and saw other races, particularly Jews, as subhuman and enemies of the state. Leadership: Adolf Hitler, who became chancellor in 1933 and quickly consolidated power, eliminated political opposition, and established a totalitarian regime. Characteristics of the Nazi regime: it was characterized by the suppression of all political opposition, extensive propaganda, a cult of personality around Hitler, and the use of state terror, including the Gestapo and concentration camps. The regime also pursued aggressive militarism, leading to World War II, and carried out the Holocaust, a genocide that resulted in the deaths of 6 million Jews and millions of others. Outcome: Nazi Germany's far-right totalitarianism led to devastating global conflict and horrific human rights abuses, ending only with the defeat of Germany in 1945. Most of us learned about the 6 million Jews who were murdered. The total death toll was much higher. Most estimates place the total number of deaths during the Second World War at around 7 to 85 million people. Approximately 17 million of these deaths, 20 to 25% of the total, were due to crimes against humanity carried out by the Nazi regime in Europe. In comparison to the millions of deaths that took place through the conflict, famine, or disease, these 17 million stand out due to the reasoning behind them, along with the systematic nature and scale in which they were carried out. 2. Fascist Italy, 1922 to 1943. Ideology: fascism under Benito Mussolini. It's a far-right nationalist ideology that emphasized strong centralized control, militarism, and the restoration of Italy to its former Roman glory. It rejected democracy, liberalism, and communism. Leadership: Mussolini, who became prime minister in 1922, gradually dismantled democratic institutions and established a dictatorship, declaring himself Il Duce, the leader. Characteristics: the fascist regime in Italy was marked by the suppression of political opposition, censorship, propaganda, the glorification of the state, and Mussolini. The regime pursued expansionist policies, leading to aggressive military campaigns in Africa and aligning with Nazi Germany during World War II. The outcome? Fascist Italy ultimately collapsed during World War II, with Mussolini being overthrown in 1943, leading to the Civil War and Italy's eventual defeat. The death toll under Mussolini is estimated to be between 300 and 500,000. Okay, let's move on to far-left totalitarian states. The first one, Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin, 1924 to 1953. Ideology: Stalinism, a form of far-left communism, emphasized the total control of the state over all aspects of life, with a focus on rapid industrialization, collectivization of agriculture, and the elimination of perceived enemies of the state. It's built on Marxist-Leninist principles and became increasingly repressive under Stalin's rule. Stalin consolidated power after Lenin's death in 1924, becoming the unchallenged leader of the Soviet Union. He eliminated rivals within the Communist Party and established a cult of personality. Characteristics of Stalinism. Stalin's regime was marked by widespread purges, forced labor camps or gulags, and state-controlled propaganda. Millions were executed, imprisoned, or died from man-made famines. The state controlled the economy, media, and culture, and any opposition was brutally suppressed. Outcome: Stalin's totalitarian rule left a legacy of fear, repression, and economic hardship. The death count under Stalin is estimated to be between 6 and 20 million. Second example of far-left totalitarianism, People's Republic of China under Mao Zedong, 1949 to 1976. Ideology, Maoism, a variant of Marxist-Leninist communism, focused on the role of the peasantry in the revolution and established a classless society. Mao sought to transform China through radical social and economic reforms. Mao led the Chinese Communist Party to victory in the Chinese Civil War, establishing the People's Republic of China in 1949. He became the paramount leader with his authority and ideology dominating all aspects of life. Characteristics of Mao's regime: it was characterized by mass campaigns such as the Great Leap Forward, which aimed at rapid industrialization and collectivization, but resulted in a catastrophic famine that killed millions. The Cultural Revolution, 66 to 76, further entrenched totalitarianism as Mao sought to eliminate bourgeois elements from Chinese society, leading to widespread persecution, destruction of cultural heritage, and the suppression of intellectuals. The outcome of all this: Mao's totalitarian policies caused immense suffering and left deep scars on Chinese society. The death toll is estimated to be between 30 and 70 million. Both far-right and far-left totalitarian states share core characteristics like the suppression of dissent, centralization of power, and the use of state terror, despite their different ideological roots. Whether driven by nationalism, racism, and authoritarianism on the far right, or by class struggle and radical egalitarianism on the far left, the result is a repressive regime that seeks total control over society, often at great human costs. Let's now consider similarities and differences between far-right and far-left fundamentalism and totalitarian states. First, the similarities. 1. Ideological rigidity. Both far-right and far-left fundamentalism involve strict adherence to a specific ideology. In either case, the ideology is viewed as the ultimate truth, with little tolerance for dissenting views. 2. Suppression of dissent. Whether driven by far-right nationalism or far-left socialism, communism, both forms of fundamentalism involve the suppression of opposition. This can manifest through censorship, political repression, and the use of state violence to eliminate or silence critics. 3. Centralization of power. Both far-right and far-left totalitarian movements seek to concentrate power in the hands of a single leader or party. This centralization is often justified by the need to protect the state or achieve ideological purity. 4. Erosion of civil liberties. Both forms of fundamentalism result in the gradual erosion of civil liberties, including freedom of speech, assembly, and press. The state justifies these actions as necessary to protect national security, social order, or the ideological purity of the society. 5. Control of information and promotion of propaganda. In both cases, the state seeks to control the flow of information, using propaganda to reinforce the dominant ideology and suppress alternative narratives. The media becomes a tool for the state, used to manipulate public perception and maintain control. And the differences between far-right and far-left fundamentalism? 1. Their ideological focus. Far-right fundamentalism is often characterized by nationalism, racial or ethnic superiority, traditionalism, and emphasis on maintaining or restoring a perceived lost culture or national identity. It may promote authoritarianism under the guise of protecting national security or traditional values. Far-left fundamentalist ideology is typically centered on ideas of class or class struggle, economic equality, and the elimination of capitalism. It may seek to dismantle existing social structures and create a state-controlled economy or collective ownership of resources. 2. How they target enemies. Far right. The enemies are often portrayed as external, immigrants, foreign nations, or internal, others, ethnic, religious, or cultural minorities, liberals, who are seen as threats to national purity and security. Far left Economically, the enemies are usually defined by class, capitalists and the bourgeois, with a focus on eliminating economic inequality. Those who resist the revolutionary change or support capitalist structures may be targeted. From a critical social justice point of view, class is not emphasized. Instead, it's any group perceived to have social privilege, for instance, able-bodied, heterosexual, cis white males. 3. Economic policies. How do they differ? Far right may support state intervention in the economy to benefit certain groups or industries, but often preserves private property and capitalism, albeit in a controlled or corporatist form. Far left typically advocates for the abolition of private property, with the state taking control of the means of production and redistributing wealth to achieve economic equality. 4. Cultural and social policies. Far right often promotes conservative social policies enforcing traditional gender roles, religious orthodoxy, and resistance to social changes perceived as liberal or progressive. The far left may push for radical social change, including the reorganization of societal roles, promotion of secularism, and efforts to eliminate perceived social inequalities, sometimes through state intervention. So, having taken time to identify and describe the psychology and dangers posed by the ideological fundamentalism on the extremes of the political right and the left, which do you think currently pose a greater threat to the West? What evidence leads you to think this? Are you sure? Might you have exaggerated claims against one and minimized or ignored claims against the other? Does one side shut down free speech and civil discourse between opposing views more than the other? Which side dominates mainstream media and academia? Which side has succeeded in infiltrating institutions and indoctrinating people, including children, with its ideology? Which side is more obsessed with competing identities? Which side exhibits more cognitive rigidity? Which side is more impervious to evidence? I don't mean hypothetically or abstractly. I mean measured by what you see and hear around you or in the news, and where you live. Where do you live and get your news? Might that tilt your view one way or the other? I might be wrong due to my own confirmation bias, but currently I see the greatest threat coming from the political fundamentalism of the left. But even if I'm wrong, I strongly assert that it is either willful ignorance or naivety that fails to see the dangers of the far left. It exhibits all the desiderata and characteristics of fundamentalism and may not lead to a totalitarian state, but if not called out and opposed, I believe it will. We have the advantage of historical memory that allows us to see the warning signs and anticipate the likely outcome when political fundamentalism is allowed to grip our collective consciousness. This, however, presupposes that young minds are properly educated and not merely indoctrinated. Having said this much, I feel and think it is vitally important that we recognize that the provocations of the far left can evoke a backlash from the far right, and it goes both ways. Within each side, there is an echo chamber of fundamentalism. Between the two, there are violent collisions resulting in concussions, rendering us confused and unconscious. We might ask, how is it that bad ideas take hold and are perpetuated? And by bad ideas, I mean ideas that ultimately, when they're widely implemented, turn out to be antithetical to the demands of life. As we have seen, they cause dysfunction and even death. To answer this question, we could reflect on the evolution of ideas using the Darwinian logic of natural selection. Metaphorically, the biological principles of evolution could be applied to the realm of ideas, beliefs, and knowledge. This might even be more than a metaphor. Maybe it's how it actually works. Just as biological species evolve over time through natural selection based on adaptive traits, ideas and thoughts can be seen as evolving in a similar way through a process often referred to as mimetic or cultural evolution. Ideas adapt to the environment of other ideas and beliefs. They exist in a subjective space, not objective physical space. If they're adopted and spread and they outcompete other ideas and beliefs, they meet the demands of evolution and come to occupy, if not dominate, collective consciousness. Credit for this general idea goes to Richard Dawkins' theory of memes, Gadsad's book, The Parasitic Mind, How Infectious Ideas Are Killing Common Sense, has also been very helpful in my thinking about this. But here's the problem with the evolution of ideas. Ultimately, life gets the final say. Objective reality has veto power on all proposed ideas. Ideas may survive and spread for a time if people are willing to believe them, but if they don't ultimately conform to what life requires, then people die. Maybe 70 million people sometimes. Maybe slowly, maybe quickly. This doesn't mean that ideas and beliefs must be objectively true in order for them to confer adaptive advantage in the physical world. Many ideas do correspond closely to reality and thereby lead to adaptive behavior. Think of medicine. And some beliefs are not objectively true, but lead to adaptive behavior nevertheless. This is the irony of religious beliefs. They persist over time because they regulate individual and collective behavior in ways that, on balance, serve life. Human beings have the miraculous ability to imagine possible realities, to dream of utopias, to mentally construct perfect societies with perfect and cosmic justice, as Thomas Sowell calls it. These visions can be emotionally compelling, especially young people who tend to be idealistic and haven't enough experience with reality to moderate their idealism. It doesn't help when such ideas come with the extreme postmodern skepticism about the very possibility of objective reality. Combine this with the exciting idea that we could make a world of radical freedom, free of suffering for everyone. No constraints on who we could be or what we could do. It's easy to see how some ideas take hold, like a virus that's found a receptor cell and a host. In this case, the receptor is the emotionally charged idealism of the host. Just one example of this kind of idea is that of equity or equal outcomes. That's just not how nature operates. We can make economic opportunities equally available and as fair as possible, but not everyone will be able to take advantage of all opportunities. That's just the way it is. Trying to force the issue through quotas and rejecting the idea of merit does not create a utopia. It violates nature and comes with serious costs. How do we know? It's been tried several times. To play with this metaphor a bit more, we could recognize that we develop immunity to viruses. The body generates antibodies and remembers the virus so that it can, if it should return, it can be fought off. Just as the pathogen of political fundamentalism is contracted and spread through subjective and intersubjective space, so too can the antibodies. Then we can get back to the business of constructing our individual and collective lives in ways that first abide by the demands of reality and life, and then stretch toward our ideals. This video is my attempt to provide such so-called antibodies. Our understanding of fundamentalist thinking and psychology, along with our memory of failed and tragic fundamentalist political experiments, is what provides some immunity. One more thing. I believe that values usually come in dialectical pairs, where each provides some balance to the other. For instance, individual freedom and collective responsibility. In a well-functioning democracy, I believe that the moderate left and the moderate right both bring important values to the table. It's through dialogue and negotiation that acceptable trade-offs are arrived at that optimize a balanced consideration for both sets of values. What has happened, however, is that each side feels that their values are ignored or attacked or are in danger of such. When this happens, one will naturally defend one's values, sometimes stridently. This can result in developing a fundamentalist belief in one's values, and if not, it can certainly be perceived that way, which will escalate further attacks from the other side. These attacks then take on a fundamentalist quality of their own, or at least can be perceived that way. The whole back and forth reaches a crescendo of division and hostile conflict, collisions and concussions. Politicians stoke the fires, make straw demons of their opponents. They provoke fear and anger toward enemies that they hope will translate into votes and therefore power. And if they get that power, half the population feels unseen or demonized, and in either case, not represented. To put this in terms of who the enemies are, in the States, the left has the basket of deplorables, and the right has the basket of idiots. Well, that's enough for now. Thanks for sticking with me to the end of this rather long video. I appreciate it. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other, and inoculate yourself against political fundamentalism, both left and right, and spread the antibodies. Bye for now.